The Rothschild estate shimmered like a dream under the golden dusk. Tucked into the rolling hills of Napa Valley, it was a sprawling paradise of fountains, marble terraces, and ivy-wrapped columns. Tonight, it played host to one of the most anticipated events of the year, the Hearts for Hope Charity Gala, hosted by billionaire tech mogul Alan Rothschild. Luxury cars lined the driveway, their doors opened by tuxedoed valets. Guests draped in designer gowns and tuxedos floated across the terrace, laughter and champagne flutes spilling into the warm night air. At the heart of it all was the man they'd all come to see. Alan, wealthy, brilliant, devastatingly handsome, and frustratingly unattached. But Alan was late. Inside the grand ballroom, florists rushed to finish last-minute touches. Among them was Nora Kings, in a lilac apron stained with pollen and ribbon. Her natural curls were pinned back in a loose puff, and soft jazz hummed in the background as she adjusted the final floral cascade hanging from the marble archway. Nora wasn't meant to stay for the gala. She was a fill-in. Her friend had called in sick, and Nora stepped in out of kindness. As the clock neared 7, she tried to slip out quietly, but the main doors had already been sealed for the exclusive event. Security mistook her for part of the serving staff, and Nora, always too polite to argue, retreated into a corner near the east wall to wait it out. The room came alive with diamonds and designer perfume. Socialites fluttered like butterflies, each one angling for Alan's attention, and when he finally arrived, dressed in a crisp navy tux with a black silk tie, the crowd shifted like a current. Alan over here purred Veronica Dane, all sharp cheekbones and red silk. "Care for a drink?" Mr. Rothschild smiled Sasha Moreno, her sequined gown clinging like second skin. Alan offered polite nods and non-committal smiles. He moved through the crowd like someone searching for an exit. Truth was, he hated these events. Not the cause. He believed deeply in giving back. But the pretense, the endless small talk, the artificial laughter. The more they tried to impress, the less real they became. And then, he saw her. Near the side wall, mostly obscured by a tall palm and 2 towering vases of orchids, sat a young woman in a plain white top, her apron folded neatly beside her. She was adjusting a bouquet, rearranging fallen petals with quiet care. Her profile was soft, her movements delicate. She looked like peace. Alan's feet moved before his brain caught up. "You missed one," he said softly, pointing to a single white rose at her feet. Nora startled, her hands pausing mid-motion. "Oh, I didn't see you there." He bent down and picked up the rose, handing it to her. Their fingers brushed. "Thank you," she said, her voice warm and unpretentious. "I was hoping no one would notice me sitting here. I'm just the help." Alan tilted his head, studying her. "You're not just anything." Nora laughed, an involuntary musical sound that made his chest feel too small. "I'm Nora. I work at the Velvet Stem, just here to do flowers. Didn't mean to stay." "I'm Alan," he said, though he didn't need to. Everyone knew who he was. "I figured," she replied with a smile that wasn't trying to seduce or impress. "You have that I own this place, but I'd rather be home look." He laughed, a real laugh, low and surprised. "That obvious?" "Only to those who feel the same." For a few moments the room faded. They spoke about flowers and travel, about how Nora volunteered at a local garden for children and found peace in soil and sun. Alan told her about coding at 12, building his first company at 19, and how lately he was beginning to wonder what all of it was for. "You're not what I expected," he admitted. "I get that a lot," Nora said, lowering her gaze. He was about to ask if she'd like to step outside for fresh air, when a waiter arrived with a tray and a strained expression. "Mr. Rothschild, the mayor would like a word." Alan glanced at Nora, reluctant. "Will you still be here?" She smiled gently, and that smile, soft, kind, untouched by vanity, hit him harder than he expected. "I doubt it. I've overstayed already." He watched her pick up her apron, gather her things, and disappear through the side exit. Back inside the ballroom, the lights burned brighter, the music swelled, and Veronica leaned into his arm. "You looked awfully cozy with the help," she said, voice dripping with fake sweetness. Alan didn't answer. His eyes were still on the door Nora had vanished through. Later that night, long after the guests had left and the staff had cleaned up, Alan stood alone in the garden courtyard. Moonlight touched the petals Nora had arranged so carefully. He could still hear her laugh, still feel the softness of her smile like an imprint on his chest. He'd met models, actresses, heiresses, women who sparkled like diamonds. But it was the florist in the corner, the woman with pollen on her hands and honesty in her eyes, who lingered in his mind. And he had no idea how to find her again. But he would. Because Alan Rothschild had seen thousands of faces, but only one had ever smiled like that. Alan Rothschild couldn't concentrate. The Monday morning boardroom was filled with numbers, projections, and reports from analysts who looked at him like he was a prophet with answers. But his mind wasn't on the projected Q3 earnings. It was still in that ballroom, on the side wall where a simple woman with a lilac apron had smiled at him like she saw the real him, not the name on his checks. Her name was Nora. Nora Kings. She hadn't given him a last name. No contact. No clue. Just a smile that had imprinted itself into the deepest parts of his memory. "Mr. Rothschild?" His assistant, Tilda, asked hesitantly. "You wanted updates on the partnership with Wellspring Tech?" Alan blinked, snapping out of the daze. "Yes. Sorry. Email it to me. I'll go over it tonight." After the meeting, Alan shut his office door, rolled up his sleeves, and began the oddest search of his life. No last name, no email, just first name. Nora, brown eyes, natural curls, wore a lilac apron, works for the Velvet Stem. It was enough. Within an hour, Tilda returned, eyebrows raised. The Velvet Stem confirmed she was a fill-in. Nora Kings, she's not on staff, freelancer. Apparently owns a small floral kiosk downtown and volunteers at a community garden every Saturday. Alan's chest lifted. Finally. "Set up a car," he said. "I'm going now." Downtown, tucked between a vintage bookstore and a bakery that smelled of fresh scones, was Nora's Nook, a modest little floral stall with hand-painted signs and buckets of sunflowers, eucalyptus, and baby's breath. It was quiet except for the rustling of petals in the afternoon breeze. Nora stood behind the counter, sleeves rolled up, tying a bouquet with twine. She didn't notice the black sedan until it pulled up across the street. Alan stepped out, trading his tailored jacket for a simple navy pullover. No press, no entourage, just a man following a memory. Nora looked up and froze. He smiled. "I wasn't sure you'd remember me." Her lips parted. "Alan Rothschild standing in front of my stall without cameras or bodyguards? You're hard to forget." "You disappeared," he said softly. "I didn't get to thank you for being the only real person in that entire ballroom." Nora laughed nervously, brushing her curls back. "I didn't belong there. I think you were the only one who did." A long pause stretched between them, charged and hesitant. "I came to buy flowers," Alan said suddenly, glancing down at the buckets. "Any recommendations?" "Depends on the occasion," she replied, slipping back into business mode. "Apology, admiration, or curiosity?" He grinned. "All three." She picked out a single white camellia and handed it to him. "Curiosity. Because you still don't know me. Apology, for the chaos you'll cause by standing here. And admiration, because you remembered." Alan took the flower, his eyes lingering on hers. "Have dinner with me." Nora hesitated. "Alan, just dinner. No cameras, no staff, no headlines." She looked down at her hands, stained green from stems and soft from years of gentleness. "Okay. But don't expect me to be impressed by fancy forks or imported water. I'm counting on that." That evening, Nora arrived at the quiet restaurant Alan had reserved entirely for the two of them. No press, no velvet ropes, just warm lighting, wood panel walls, and soft acoustic music humming through the room. She wore a long sage green dress with simple earrings. Her curls framed her face naturally. No flashy makeup. No need for it. Alan stood when she entered, his eyes never leaving her. "You look radiant." She raised an eyebrow. "You don't do small talk well, do you?" He chuckled, leading her to the table. "I've spent years surrounded by people who only talk to impress. With you, I'd rather just listen." They spoke for hours, about childhood memories, her love of gardening passed down from her grandmother, his fear of becoming numb to life because of too much success too fast, her dream of opening a bigger floral shop that doubled as a therapy space for underprivileged women. Alan had never opened up like this. He didn't want to stop. But as the night wore on, something changed. Outside, a camera flash, then another. Someone had found them. Nora stiffened. "You said no press. I didn't tell anyone, I promise." But the next morning, the headlines told a different story. Billionaire's new mystery date. Who is she? Nora Kings, florist or fortune hunter. Alan Rothschild ditches models for modern Cinderella. Nora's phone buzzed nonstop. Reporters crowded her stall. Curious strangers came asking for selfies. Her flower deliveries were delayed. Her customers, mostly quiet locals, stopped coming. Business dropped. And then came the whispering. Veronica Dane showed up one afternoon, leaning on the counter with a venomous smile. "Well, you've certainly stirred the pot, haven't you?" she said, tossing her sunglasses onto the petals of a peony bunch. "Didn't take you long to go viral." "I'm not interested in drama," Nora replied coolly. "Oh, sweetheart, you are the drama," Veronica said, fake pouting. "Just don't get comfortable. Men like Alan don't stay enchanted for long, especially not with women like you." Nora swallowed the sting and held her head high. Maybe he was just tired of women like you. But as the door swung shut behind Veronica, Nora's hands trembled. That evening, she didn't return Alan's calls. When he showed up at her stall again, she stood firm. "I didn't ask for this. I'm not made for your world." "You don't have to be," he said gently. "You're made for you. And that's enough." "It's not, Alan. Not when everyone sees me as a scandal. I won't be your tabloid accessory." He looked hurt, but didn't argue. Nora stepped back. "Please, just let me go back to my quiet life." That night, Alan stood in his penthouse, staring out at the city skyline, the bouquet of camellias wilting in his hand. He had built empires, bought islands, and negotiated billion-dollar mergers. But the only thing he wanted, really wanted, was a woman who walked away because she valued peace over status. And suddenly, that made her even more impossible to forget. The news cycle moved fast. In a week, social media had churned through the mystery of Alan Rothschild's unknown date, speculated on everything from Nora's background to her supposed motives, and finally, like all storms, began to pass. But not for Alan. He hadn't seen or heard from Nora King since she told him goodbye. Not even a reply to the flowers he sent. Not a single text. It was as if she had gently erased herself from his orbit, and in doing so, left a hole he couldn't seem to fill. "You look like hell," said Alan's younger sister Juliana, walking into his penthouse unannounced. "Thanks for the warm greeting," Alan muttered, barely glancing up from the window where he'd been staring at nothing. "Is this about the florist?" "Her name is Nora," he said sharply. Juliana sat beside him. "You're Alan Rothschild. You don't chase women." Alan turned toward her, jaw set. "That's exactly why I'm going to." 2 days later, Alan found himself in a place his driver had never taken him before, a community garden on the south side of the city. It wasn't glamorous. Faded signs, patches of wild sunflowers, and children's laughter filled the air. It smelled like fresh earth and hope. At the far end of the lot, tending to a bed of lavender, was Mrs. Marigold, an elderly woman with silver hair tucked under a sun hat and hands dirtier than the ground. Alan introduced himself, but she already knew who he was. "You're the one who broke our Nora's heart," she said plainly, brushing dirt off her gloves. Alan flinched. I never meant to hurt her. Intentions don't soften consequences, son, Mrs. Marigold replied. But I'll tell you this. Since that girl met you, she hasn't smiled the same. Alan's breath caught. He hadn't expected that. I'd like to fix it, he said quietly. Mrs. Marigold narrowed her eyes. Then do something that shows her you see her, not just what you want from her. The opportunity came sooner than expected. Alan was scheduled to speak at the annual Summit of Innovation, a global conference hosted in San Francisco, where CEOs, politicians, and philanthropists gathered to talk about the future of humanity. His keynote was the final one, prime time. Every news outlet would be watching. But Alan had other plans. That morning, Nora sat in a small coffee shop downtown, trying to focus on her orders for the day. She sipped her tea, scrolling her phone, until she saw his name. Live. Alan Rothschild's summit keynote. She almost swiped past it, but something in her gut told her to watch. Alan walked onto the stage in a charcoal suit, but his energy was different. Softer. Focused. I was going to talk to you today about innovation, he began, about technology and AI and scalable systems. But I changed my mind. A ripple of murmurs ran through the audience. Alan took a breath. Because what's the point of creating the future if we can't recognize what matters in the present? Nora leaned in. Recently, he continued, I met someone who reminded me that authenticity is more powerful than appearance. That kindness speaks louder than ambition. That a single smile, honest and warm, can break through years of polished surfaces and fake conversations. The camera panned in on his face. She didn't wear designer gowns. She didn't flirt for attention. She didn't ask for anything. She just was herself. And I didn't realize how rare that is. Nora's heart pounded in her chest. I made the mistake of thinking I could protect her from the noise of my world. But I forgot the world doesn't always wait for your protection. It just storms in. He paused, looked straight into the camera. So, Nora Kings, if you're watching, I'm sorry I didn't step in sooner. I'm sorry I didn't shield you better. But most of all, I'm sorry I let you walk away believing you didn't belong. Gasps filled the room. Alan smiled gently. You didn't just belong. You changed everything. Nora stood up so fast she knocked over her tea. She fumbled for her coat and sprinted out of the shop. 15 minutes later, Alan exited the building into a sea of cameras and reporters. He waved politely but kept walking. Past the security line, past the valet, toward the street. That's when he saw her. Nora. Hair tousled by the wind, breathing hard, cheeks flushed. For a moment, everything froze. You really said my name on live television? She asked, half laughing, half crying. He stepped toward her. I would have written it in the sky if it would have brought you here. She shook her head. You know what people are going to say now? I don't care. And my shop, I'll buy the block if I have to. Alan. He reached her, took her hands in his. You told me you didn't want to be a scandal. You weren't. You were the only real thing that's happened to me in a long, long time. Tears gathered in her eyes. Why me? He leaned in, voice low and tender. Because I've seen diamonds. But your smile is the light I never knew I needed. For a second, neither spoke. Then, without hesitation, she wrapped her arms around him and whispered, You didn't just see me. You chose me. The crowd around them burst into applause. Cameras flashed, and for the first time, Nora didn't care. A month later, Alan hosted a press conference. Not for a product launch, not for a merger, but to introduce a new initiative, the Bloom Project, a non-profit floral therapy and mentorship program co-founded with Nora Kings. It would offer job training and emotional healing for women rebuilding their lives after trauma, poverty, or domestic abuse. Nora stood beside him, not hidden, not afraid. And when she smiled at him before taking the mic, Alan Rothschild, tech titan, billionaire, man who had once had the world at his feet, smiled back like he finally understood what it meant to have everything. 1 year later, the world had moved on from the headlines, but Alan and Nora, they were still headline-worthy in each other's lives, just not in the ways tabloids would understand. Their love unfolded not with noise, but with meaning. Private museum tours where Alan held her hand tighter than any auction paddle, picnics in the park with sandwiches and sunflowers, jazz nights at a tucked-away rooftop bar where Nora could rest her head on his shoulder while the city twinkled around them. They danced in their socks in Alan's kitchen, watched foreign films with subtitles too fast to follow, argued about how to arrange books, by genre or color. She teased him for using 5 kinds of coffee beans and still preferring hers. He took her to Tuscany in spring, where they rode bikes through vineyards and kissed under lemon trees, to Morocco in autumn, where she wore flowing linen, and he bargained poorly in the markets just to make her laugh. But it was in Paris on a rainy night when the streets shimmered like glass that Alan surprised her with a private dinner inside a candlelit greenhouse on the rooftop of the Hôtel Particulier Montmartre. A string quartet played softly. The air smelled of fresh peonies. And beneath a canopy of stars, real and hand-strung, Alan dropped to one knee. "Nora Kings," he said, voice thick with emotion. "You smiled at me once and reset everything I thought I knew about love. Will you be my forever?" She laughed through happy tears, nodding before he even finished the question. "Yes, Alan, of course, yes." For the wedding, they didn't want a royal circus, but neither wanted it small. So they chose magic. A vineyard in Provence, late June. Rows of wildflowers instead of pews. Guests dressed in shades of earth and sky. The ceremony was at sunset, with golden light kissing the edges of Nora's off-shoulder lace gown. Her natural curls framed her face. No veil, just a crown of fresh lilacs and white camellias. Alan wore a cream suit and brown leather shoes that Nora had jokingly banned from their first date. "Sentimental," he'd said. Mrs. Marigold walked her down the aisle. Tears shimmered in everyone's eyes when Alan took Nora's hands and whispered his vows, soft and steady. "I built a world for myself, but you gave it color." And when they kissed, confetti wasn't thrown. Butterflies rose from behind the altar and filled the sky. They dined under fairy lights. Nora's floral friends decorated every table with hand-picked blooms. The menu was a blend of Alan's favorites and her grandmother's recipes. No influencer crowd, no press, just love, real and full. During their honeymoon, they escaped to Bali, Indonesia, staying in a jungle villa overlooking rice terraces and distant volcanoes. Mornings with mango pancakes and fresh coconut on the terrace. Afternoons spent reading in bamboo hammocks, swimming beneath waterfalls, and eating too much satay. They got lost exploring Ubud's artisan markets, slow danced barefoot on the deck of their infinity pool, and fell asleep to the sound of cicadas in each other's breath. One evening, while watching the sunset bleed into the ocean from Jimbaran Bay, Nora turned to him. "Can you believe all of this started with one smile?" Alan kissed her temple, pulling her close. "I'd wait through 1,000 crowded rooms, just to see that smile again." And she smiled, wide, honest, radiant, the same way she always had, the way that had changed everything. Thank you so much for watching and supporting my channel. Your love, comments, and shares mean everything to me. Grateful for each of you. Let's keep growing together. With love from Whispers of Hope.